Hi guys, welcome back. Today's video is part 2 of 3 videos on modals. In today's lesson, we'll talk about how we use modals to express varying degrees of certainty, making inferences or educated guesses, degree of strength when we're trying to give advice, and also the varying degrees of politeness or formality. As we discussed last week, the 9 modals in English are can, could, may, might, must, shall, should, will, and would. And there are many phrasal modals as well, such as have to, be going to, and be supposed to. And if you want an overview of all the modals and basic rules, then please refer to last week's video, and I will link that video down below as well. Let's talk about how we can use modals to express different degrees of certainty. So for example, how sure are you of what you're saying? So in this scenario on the slide, it says someone is knocking at the door. If you and your friends are just hanging out and somebody's at the door and Mary asks, "Who is that?" there are different ways to answer this question depending on how sure you are of your answer. These answers listed on this slide are all in the present. So we're talking about a present situation. So your answer can be, it's the pizza guy. The verb is, it is not a modal, but if you do answer in this way, that means you are certain. There's no doubt, maybe you saw him, right? There's no doubt that it's the pizza guy. But if you're not certain, you can say it must be the pizza guy, or it has to be the pizza guy because it's the only logical explanation. Or you can say it should be the pizza guy because, there's nobody else you're really expecting. Or you can say it could be the pizza guy, it might be the pizza guy, or it may be the pizza guy. All the three on the bottom implies that you are least certain of your answer. So these answers that you see on this slide, it goes from the most certain, starting with this verb, it's not a modal, is, and then it goes down to maybe 90%, to maybe 60%, and to these three, which are just making guesses. It's just suggestions, right? You really have no idea. So these are some ways that you can use modals to express varying degrees of certainty when you're giving your answers. You can also use modals to talk about the probability of future events. So for example, how sure you are that something might happen in the future. So if you look at the first row, it says there will be many more electric cars in 20 years. If you use the modal will, then you're 100% certain that this is going to happen. If you look at the second row, it says there should be fewer people willing to pay for the rising cost of gasoline. If you say should to talk about future events, it's very probable, it's very likely, and you're almost sure that this is what's going to happen. If you look at the next row, it says there may be new brands of electric cars in the near future. This is a little bit less certain, but it is still quite possible, and it's like 30 to 60%. And I apologize for these numbers. Clearly, these are not accurate. It's just kind of rough numbers, estimated numbers. The next row says more people might opt to take public transportation in the future. Or families could downsize to 1 car per household. For both might and could in these sentences, these are somewhat possible, 5 to 30%, but you're not that sure, right? We're just kind of taking a guess about what might happen. In the last row, it says the way people choose their cars will not be the same as it is today. If you're saying will not, you're saying that that's not going to happen. You're so sure that this is not going to happen. So there's 0 probability. Let's talk about degrees of certainty in the present time, but using negation. So for example, Mary is not eating any of her food. And then John asks, why isn't she eating anything? Okay, so depending on how certain you are of your answer, there are many ways you can reply. The first one on top says she isn't hungry, and that's why she's not eating. If you use this verb is not, it's not a modal, but this means that you are the most certain and you are 100% certain because maybe she told you that she's not hungry. The next level of certainty will be can't. She can't be hungry, right? It's impossible that she's hungry because maybe you saw her eat at a buffet 10 minutes ago, right? So you're almost sure. She must not be hungry. It's still pretty certain, but not as certain as the first two. You're making a logical conclusion, a very educated guess as to why she's not eating. Maybe Mary eats all the time if she's hungry, but she's not eating now, so she must not be hungry, right? So you're drawing a conclusion. The last one says she might not be hungry or she may not be hungry. These answers, you are the least certain. So you're just throwing out options or guesses, blind guesses as to why she might not be eating. We also use modals to make inferences. Inferences just means that we're making a logical conclusion or an educated guess. So the first row says that woman must be the boy's mom. If I use the modal must, it means that there is no other explanation, right? The second row says there should be a good reason why the teacher assigned this activity. If you say should to make inferences, this is a logical conclusion, but it can be wrong. The third row says the computer might be broken, something might be happening on campus. If we use the verb might, this is just one of several possibilities, so it's kind of like a 50-50 chance. The last row says the woman couldn't be her mom, or the woman can't be her mom. If I use this negated modal couldn't or can't, it means that it's impossible. Now let's talk about making inferences in past time. So we're making logical conclusions of what might have happened in the past. In this situation, we're always going to use this formula. We're going to have a modal, the verb have, and a past participle. For those of you who might have forgotten what a past participle is, a past participle is always that third verb. So with the verb eat, it's eat, ate, eaten. So that third eaten will be the past participle. With the verb write, it will be write, wrote, written. So written is the past participle. So again, when we're making inferences in past time, we will always use modal, have, and past participle. In this situation, it says, why didn't Mary come to the meeting? So Mary didn't come, the meeting was yesterday, and we're trying to infer or we're trying to guess as to why she didn't show up. If your answer is Mary must have forgotten, using this modal implies that this is the most logical conclusion you can draw from the situation. If you look at the next three sentences, it says Mary may have been ill, she might have overslept, she could have had a sudden emergency. All three of these are just suggestions or possible reasons, right? You're just guessing as to why she didn't come. If you look at the last one, she couldn't have forgotten about the meeting. That means you feel like it's impossible that that's what happened, right? Because normally she would never do that. So let's move on to giving suggestions and advice using modals. Here we use could, might, should, or ought to, and must, or have to, or had better. The ones in the parentheses are phrasal modals. and they serve the same function as modals. And again, if you want to know the difference between phrasal modals and modals, please refer to the part 1 of this series, which will be linked down below. In this situation, you're giving advice to a friend who is struggling to pass her math class and is very upset. So you can say, you might want to see a tutor, or you could see a tutor, or you may want to see a tutor. All of these are kind of weak. They're just suggestions. You're not aggressively pushing to do anything. The next one says you should see a tutor, which is a stronger form of advice. You can also say you ought to see a tutor, but I think that's less common. Most people would probably say you should see a tutor. And lastly, you can say you must see a tutor or you have to see a tutor. In this last scenario, I think socially people use the phrasal modal have to more often. So this is going in the order of weakest suggestion to strong advice. Lastly, let's move on to using modals to express different degrees of politeness. In these scenarios, I'm going to use the pronoun you. The first example says, would you pass the pepper? This is the most polite out of the examples we would discuss. The next one is, will you pass the pepper? The next one says, could you pass the pepper? And then the least polite is, can you pass the pepper? I think the least polite sounds like we're being rude, but it's not. We're just trying to say that it's the most casual, right? So it's going from the most polite to the least polite. And if you look at the last example here, it says, do not say, may you pass the pepper? So if you're going to express politeness using modals, you can use may with the pronouns I or we, like may I open the window, but not with the pronoun you. This is just a reminder that your choice of modal in degrees of formality doesn't change the meaning at all. It only affects formality. So can I open the window? Could I open the window? Or may I open the window? All three are asking for permission if you can open the window, but it doesn't change the meaning. Whereas in some other situations, modals can change meaning in the sentence, but not in this scenario. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found that helpful. And if you did, please give this video a like and consider subscribing to my channel. And please stay tuned for part 3 of this series on modals. And please feel free to comment on any future video ideas or questions you may have about anything related to English grammar. I'll see you guys next week.